As we learn more about radio, we'll discuss the characteristics of modern radio, economics of commercial radio, and the role of radio in a democratic society. Unlike the early days of radio, large markets today, like Raleigh-Durham, have more than 40 radio stations vying for listeners. More than 15,000 radio stations now operate in the United States. Outside of national networks, most programming is locally produced, or made to sound like it, and heavily dependent on music. Modern programming is more specialized, and in turn, listeners are loyal to their favorite stations, music formats, and even radio personalities, generally only listening to 4 or 5 stations. My car radio only has 2 stations programmed, just alternating back and forth on 6 presets. Modern radio stations use a variety of formats to serve diverse listeners. Advertisers want to know exactly who is listening, so formats target audiences according to specific demographics. This enables advertisers to reach smaller, targeted audiences at costs much lower than television. The most popular overall format in the U.S. is country music, considered a default format for small communities with only one radio station. Country is the top-ranked format by Nielsen, with 13% of all people ages 12 and up listening to the radio in an average quarter hour tuned into a country station. 94.7 WQDR is the highest-rated country radio station in the Raleigh-Durham market. The second most popular format is news and talk radio, catering to adults 35 and older and leveraging the popularity of personalities Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Dave Ramsey on stations like 106.1 FM Talk. This category also includes NPR-affiliated stations like WUNC 91.5. The third most popular format, capturing about 8% of all listeners, is adult contemporary. This is one of radio's oldest and most popular formats, targeting listeners over 40 with a mix of news, talk, oldies, and soft rock. Raleigh's WRAL Mix 101.5 is an example of an adult contemporary, or AC, radio station. Slightly behind AC is Contemporary Hit Radio, or CHR. This is your top 40 radio station, playing anything from rap to pop rock that appeals to teens and young adults. CHR stations are waning in popularity as audiences turn first to MTV and then to online sources. Pulse FM 96.9 and 102.5 is a local CHR station. Other popular radio formats are urban contemporary and urban adult contemporary, programmed with popular dance, rap, R&B, and hip-hop to target Black audiences. Raleigh's most popular urban programmed radio stations are Foxy 107.1 and K97.5. One of radio's fastest growing formats is Spanish language radio, concentrated mainly in large Latinx markets. Besides talk shows and news segments in Spanish, this format features a variety of Spanish, Caribbean, and Latin American music styles. La Ley 101.1 FM is one of these stations, programming a format called Regional Mexican. This pie chart shows the most popular radio formats in the U.S. among listeners ages 12 and up, based on data from Nielsen's Audio Today 2018 report. Each individual format targets a specific audience, and in turn sells that audience to its advertisers. As noted, country music has the biggest slice of the format pie, with news talk in the number 2 slot. Formats aside, there are 2 types of broadcast radio stations, commercial and non-commercial. The terms nonprofit, public, and non-commercial educational, or NCE radio, are often used interchangeably with non-commercial. In 1945, the FCC designated 1/5 of the FM radio band, from 88.1 to 91.9, for the exclusive use of non-commercial educational radio. More important changes for non-commercial radio came about in 1948, when the FCC authorized non-commercial licenses to stations not affiliated with labor, religion, education, or civic groups. That same year, the FCC authorized low-power, 10-watt FM radio stations. Previously, radio stations needed at least 250 watts to be licensed. A 10-watt radio station, with a broadcast range of only about 7 miles, took very little money to operate, so the ruling enabled many more people to participate in radio. These changes led to the 1949 founding of the Pacifica Foundation, a listener-supported radio broadcasting foundation still active today, with affiliates across the country. The 1960s was another big decade for change for non-commercial broadcasting. The Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the nonprofit parent organization of the first non-commercial networks. Television's Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS, began in 1969, with National Public Radio following in 1970. With more than 1,000 member stations, NPR draws 36 million listeners each week with its popular news and interview programs like Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Fresh Air. Outside of traditional radio, 8.1 million download NPR podcasts each week. Both NPR and PBS and their affiliates provide alternatives to commercial broadcasting and rely on a mixture of private donations, corporate sponsorship, and public contributions. As with other media we have learned about so far this semester, radio has also made the digital turn by converging with the internet. And in some ways, it has caused radio to return to its early roots. Internet radio emerged in the 1990s. It is widely believed WXYC, the student-run station at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was the first radio station in the world to simulcast its broadcast signal over the internet on November 7, 1994. Today, many radio stations stream their broadcast programming over the internet. Other radio stations only exist online, meaning nearly any individual or group with some technical skills could start a radio station, just like when radio first started in the 1920s. With a limited number of broadcast radio stations available and the high costs associated with them, colleges and community groups have embraced internet-only radio. North Carolina Central University, University of North Carolina Wilmington, and UNC Charlotte are just some of the schools in North Carolina that offer student-run internet radio streams. Another major change to radio in the digital turn is podcasting. Developed in 2004, podcasting is the practice of making audio files available online so listeners can subscribe to feeds and download new episodes automatically. Podcasts are generally free and can attract very niche markets, covering general areas like sports and true crime, and more specific topics like pens and watching Gilmore Girls. They also have marked a return to storytelling, instructional programs, and topics of local interest, largely missing in modern corporate radio. By 2017, 1 in 6 Americans were listening to podcasts at least once a week. Satellite radio is another relatively new aspect of radio broadcasting. SiriusXM offers hundreds of channels of digital music, news, and talk, including live sports play-by-play, 24/7 Dave Matthews Band, 1970s and 80s super party hits, and modern Canadian Indigenous music. SiriusXM can also offer more risque content, like uncensored comedy, and shock jock Howard Stern, since it's a subscription-based service similar to cable television. Finally, HD radio was approved by the FCC in 2002 as a digital technology that enables AM and FM broadcasts to multicast 2 to 3 additional digital signals along with their analog frequency. Raleigh's WRAL 101.5 was the first radio station on the East Coast to begin broadcasting in HD. It now offers its adult contemporary format on HD1, contemporary Christian music on WRAL HD2, and sports radio on HD3. Radio remains one of the most used mass media, reaching 93% of all Americans 12 and older every week. As a result, selling radio ads is big business. About 10% of all U.S. spending on media advertising goes to radio stations. Prices can range from just a few dollars per 30-second ad to $1,500 for an ad on the top-rated stations in large markets. Another plus for commercial radio stations is they often spend little on content, receiving much of it for free from the recording industry. While radio stations do pay royalties to songwriters and music publishers, they do not pay them to the performing artists or record companies, arguing that the promotional value of getting songs played on the radio is sufficient compensation. The fact that broadcasters don't pay these royalties and satellite and streaming companies do has led to years of ongoing tension. Some commercial stations purchase programming from networks like Westwood One, who provides music, entertainment, and news talk programs. Stations sometimes pay for the programs with money, receive the programming for free in exchange for time slots for national radio ads, or a combination of the two. Another issue in the economics of commercial radio is payola, a practice by which record promoters or labels pay DJs to play particular songs. The practice ran rampant in the 1950s, resulting in management taking control over programming, with the argument that if individual announcers had less control over their playlists, they would be less susceptible to bribery. Of course, all that really meant was program and music directors started taking bribes instead of individual DJs. Despite congressional hearings and new regulations, payola persisted in the industry, although to a lesser degree. With the growth of music and radio streaming services, the practice of payola has again surfaced. But because streaming services aren't considered broadcasting, they fall outside the FCC's oversight. Billboard magazine reports that music promoters have been paying to influence playlists at services like Spotify, Deezer, and Apple Music. Playlists, used by hundreds of thousands of subscribers to discover new music, are created by the streaming services, influential individuals, or the music labels themselves. In 2015, Spotify announced it would prohibit any playlists that had been influenced by money or other compensation. From the 1950s through the 1980s, the FCC tried to encourage diversity in broadcast ownership, and by extension, programming, by limiting the number of stations a media company could own. But that changed when the Telecommunications Act of 1996 eliminated most ownership restrictions on radio. Some 2,100 radio stations and $15 billion changed hands in 1996 alone, with the number of radio station owners declining from 6,600 in 1995 to just 4,400 5 years later. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 allowed individuals and companies to acquire more or less as many radio stations as they wanted, with relaxed restrictions on the number of stations a single broadcaster may own in the same city. The larger the market or area, the more stations a company may own within that market. The company that took the biggest advantage of the relaxed rules was Clear Channel Communications, now called iHeartMedia, the nation's largest radio chain owner. It owned more than 1,200 stations at its peak in 2005, and more than 850 stations in 153 markets in 2021. iHeart also owns about 600,000 billboard and outdoor displays in 20 countries, and distributes many of the leading syndicated programs like The Rush Limbaugh Show and On Air with Ryan Seacrest. In the Raleigh-Durham market, iHeart owns G105, B93.9, New Country, 100.7 WRDU, 106.1 FM Talk, and Alt 95.3. Not surprisingly, the three largest commercial radio groups, iHeartMedia, Cumulus, and Town Square Media, dominate the 50 largest radio markets and control at least a third of the entire radio industry's revenue. Activists fought back against the growing consolidation of the industry by operating unlicensed pirate radio stations capable of broadcasting a few miles with a low power signal of 1 to 10 watts. The FCC responded by developing a new non-commercial broadcasting class, low power FM, with 10 to 100 watt radio stations that gave a voice to religious groups, high schools, colleges, Native American tribes, labor groups, museums, and others lacking access to the public airwaves. Finally, we consider the role of radio in a democratic society. As the first national electronic mass medium, radio has powerfully molded American culture. It gave us soap operas, situation comedies, and broadcast news. It helped popularize rock and roll, car culture, and the politics of talk radio. Yet for all its national influence and recent move toward consolidation, broadcast radio is still a supremely local medium. For decades, listeners have tuned in to hear the familiar voices of their community's DJs and talk show hosts. Early debate over whether radio should operate in the public interest, convenience, and necessity persists today, with many broadcasting executives arguing because radio corporations invest heavily in technology, they should have more control over the radio frequencies on which they operate, with no limit on the number of stations they can own. Deregulation in the past few decades has moved the industry closer to that corporate vision. A newer question centers on whether consolidation of power restricts the number and kinds of voices permitted to speak over the public airwaves. Similar to how major record labels are criticized for only investing in talent they find readily marketable, commercial radio may not take chances on innovative new content. But also like the rise of indie record labels, the proliferation of internet radio, LPFM, and podcasting increases the availability of new voices.